of the things in my library, so I'm going to talk about that a bit. Um, and it occurred to me that some people might be interested in the question, what is truth? But there are a couple of my subscribers, one of them especially, who wrote some big questions to me. And so I'll just tease these questions and then come back to them. What is your personal opinion of existence? These are no small questions. Why do you think we are here? How did we get here, and where will we go? And is there any scientific, occult, or esoteric meaning behind C.G. Jung's psychology? And so I'll come back to those questions, but I wanted to. A number of people have asked me or commented on how difficult it is to find the truth. And you can, and Mary Louise says, I think that's everyone's question. Yeah, I guess it is. And it occurred to me that the answer to that question is really very similar to mine and Dr. Jung's, as it turned out, answer to what is the meaning of life, and that is um, you. Okay, you are the meaning of life, and each one of us is a descendant from a continuous chain of live beings going back to single-celled organisms. And so all of our grandparents, going all the way back to that point, um, lived, devoured, and reproduced in order to produce you. And that's what their expectation was. And of course, we all share a lot of DNA going back enough. For example, if I go back to my first American ancestor who came to the New World in 1625, one of the first European settlers, his name was Wilfred Gerritsen von Kohenhofen, and he was from a village named Kohenhofen in which today would be sort of in the center of Amersfoort in the Netherlands. But we sometimes point with pride to him, but he's 13 generations back. And if you go by the number of grandparents and great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents going all the way back, and he's 13 generations back, so he is 1 over 8120 of my DNA. And so at that level, going back, I had 8119, 8,119 other great-great-great-great-grandparents going all the way back. And obviously, as you go further then, the next generation makes it 1 over 16,000 plus, and the next generation makes it 1 over 32,000. And so, and that's only 15 generations, so that takes us back to the 16th century. And so if you go back 100 generations or so in humanity, most of us probably share DNA with everyone else on the planet. My father used to joke that everybody in the Western world is descended from Alexander the Great. Well, everyone in the Eastern world might be too, because Alexander the Great blew through the Khyber Pass and into India in about 330 BC, something like that. And so if he was interacting with women along the way, which was the way of warriors in those days, um, then it's very likely that there are descendants of Alexander the Great all throughout India, Pakistan, um, Afghanistan, and then going on into Tibet and China. And at the same time, there are many descendants of Genghis Khan in China and Japan, and so and Korea, of course, uh, Taiwan, all the Asian and South Asian countries, um, and so there is a truth that we all share. We all share a certain amount of our DNA, and but all of our grandparents going all the way back, and let's suppose we have a common ancestor as Alexander the Great or Genghis Khan, um, then those ancestors um, reproduced to create you, and the meaning of their life became you. And as you go forward in your life, you will um, pass things along to the next generation. And so, truth, it occurred to me, is like that in the sense that there is no one truth. There's only truth as you see it, and each one of us sees it differently. And I made that observation, and then by synchronicity, I was looking at a book. So this is going to start my discussion of my library, except I'm not going to go into the standard collected works things and the Red Book and so on, which we talk about all the time. And also, I will put onto this video, the replay of this video, I will put a link to Lecture 3, which I did in June of 2016. And in that, I will miss your answer because I have to move my... Okay. So you'll be able to look it up at 12 minutes and 40 seconds into this video, Marie Louise. But in any case, so I'm not going to go into the standard things in the lecture, which is about a 30-minute lecture. I talked about where to start in Jungian psychology, and I gave all the books that I started with and how I got into it and why I got into it. And so I will, with the replay of this session, I will put the link to that lecture number 3. And you can listen to that. I did talk about it for about a half hour, and so I'm not going to do that again here. But I am going to talk about some unique books that I think are very interesting. And there's a couple of books that I think are very useful, one of which I'm going to read from at length. One of them is this book, and this is C.G. Jung, Psychological Reflections. It's called C.G. Jung, Psychological Reflections. And it is edited by Jolande, Jacobi, and R.F.C. Hall. Now, Jolande Jacobi was one of Dr. Jung's closest disciples in the 30s and 40s especially, and into the 50s. And R.F.C. Hall was one of the main translators of Dr. Jung's work. Dr. Jung's work literally became R.F.C. Hall's work because he was a handicapped man. He lived in Mallorca, apparently, and he made it his life's work to translate Dr. Jung's oeuvre from German into English. And so he probably has the closest relationship to Dr. Jung's work of any human being during his lifetime. Um, and so their selections, I think, are particularly poignant. Before I read from that, I'll just mention these other books, um, since we're talking bibliography here. Um, a second book that's very similar is this book, The Quotable Young. And The Quotable Young is another book with selections of quotations. And the reason I mention these things is because not everybody, including me, can get into Dr. Jung's main writing directly. Okay, it's a very difficult material. He has a complex way of sentence structure that's a German sentence structure, and so it seems to me valuable to develop a taste for his work and for understanding his work before you dive into the collected works. I mean, it's great if you can do it, but I think a lot of people get one paragraph into it and they go, oh, and so it's something like Finnegan's Wake. Did you ever try Finnegan's Wake? James Joyce said of Finnegan's Wake at one point that he was asked why he wrote such a complex novel, because it's apparently 8 layers deep, and his answer was to keep critics clucking about it for 300 years. Well, I don't think Dr. Jung consciously wanted to do that, but the complexity of his writing is sometimes pretty deep, so it can be valuable. And as I said, I've been keeping this book, The Quotable Young, on my nightstand because in 1990 I read Man and His Symbols, which is the book that Dr. Jung wrote for laymen. I kept that by our bed, and every night when my wife and I would go to bed, I would read to her 3 or 4 pages from Man and His Symbols. And after a year of doing that, I personally felt like I had had a year's psychotherapy, and I thought it was very helpful to me. And so recently, my wife and I have decided to take up our practice of reading to one another once again. And so I'm reading to her The Quotable Young, and she's usually reading to me something either from Facebook or um, Tibetan Buddhism. But that's our dueling banjos as we go to sleep each night. And okay, so another nice book, good book, is The Undiscovered Self, and we have talked quite a bit about the undiscovered self or about the self as we have been in this year. And so I just opened it to a random page the other day. Let me just see what this is. Okay. There's an interesting political point he makes here, but I just opened it to a random page the other day, and so I'll just read one page to you. The structure and physiology, I'm reading from page 47 of this book. The structure and physiology of the brain furnish no explanation of the psychic process. The psyche has a peculiar nature which cannot be reduced to anything else. Like physiology, it represents a relatively self-contained field of experience to which we must attribute a quite special importance because it holds within itself one of the two indispensable conditions for existence as such, namely the phenomenon of consciousness. Without consciousness, there would, practically speaking, be no world, for the world exists as such only insofar as it is consciously reflected and consciously expressed by a psyche. Consciousness is a precondition of being. Thus, the psyche is endowed with the dignity of a cosmic principle, which philosophically and in fact gives it a position co-equal with the principle of physical being. The carrier of this consciousness is the individual, who does not produce the psyche on his own volition, but is, on the contrary, preformed by it and nourished by the gradual awakening of consciousness during childhood. If the psyche must be granted an overriding empirical importance, so also must the individual, who is the only immediate manifestation of the psyche. This fact must be expressly emphasized for two reasons. Firstly, the individual psyche, just because of its individuality, is an exception to the statistical rule and is therefore robbed of one of its main characteristics when subjected to the leveling influence of statistical evaluation. Secondly, the churches grant it validity only insofar as it acknowledges their dogmas. In other words, when it surrenders to a collective category. In both cases, the will to individuality is regarded as egotistic obstinacy. Science devalues it as subjectivism, and the churches condemn it morally as heresy and spiritual pride. As to the latter charge, it should not be forgotten that unlike other religions, Christianity holds at its core a symbol which has for its content the individual way of life of a man, the Son of Man, and that it even regards this individuation process as the incarnation and revelation of God Himself. Hence, the development of the self acquires a significance whose full implications have hardly begun to be appreciated, because too much attention to externals blocks the way to immediate inner experience. Were not the autonomy of the individual the secret longing of many people, this hard-pressed phenomenon would scarcely be able to survive the collective suppression, either morally or spiritually. So I thought that that was quite a poignant comment. There's another here, which is about politics, or it gets into politics. I'm now reading from, I was reading from pages 47 to 49, and now I'm reading from page 73 and 74. The rupture between faith and knowledge is a symptom of the split consciousness, which is so characteristic of the mental disorder of our day. It is as if two different persons were making statements about the same thing, each from his own point of view, or as if one person in two different frames of mind were sketching a picture of his experience. If for person we substitute modern society, it is evident that the latter is suffering from a mental dissociation, i.e., a neurotic disturbance. In view of this, it does not help matters at all if one party pulls obstinately to the right and the other to the left. This is what happens in every neurotic psyche, to its own deep distress, and it is just this distress that brings the patient to the doctor. Okay. So we can talk about political psychology when I can have better access to the to the chat, but in any case, I wanted to mention one other book, and that's this book, C.G. Jung, A Biography in Books, and this is by Sonu Shamdasani, who was the editor and translator of much of the Red Book. And the picture on the cover shows a portion of Dr. Jung's library, obviously. And it's quite a beautiful book. It's also quite expensive. Here's a lovely picture of Dr. Jung's home in Kusnacht. But I had marked out a few pages that I thought were interesting. One was this section on descent into hell. And so here you have a picture of Philemon, who was Dr. Jung's imaginal guru, but beneath is an Indian picture, I believe. I don't think this is the Indian images by Dr. Jung. Dr. Jung was talking heavily about the Odyssey in the Red Book, and so Shamdasani says, in the handwritten draft, Liber Secundus, which is a part of the Red Book, is subtitled The Adventures of the Odyssey. In the corrected draft, it is retitled The Great Odyssey. Not for nothing did Jung suggest to Aniela Jaffe that the lines from the Odyssey, quote, happily escaped from the jaws of death, unquote, be used as a motto for Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Now, Memories, Dreams, Reflections was Dr. Jung's autobiography of his psychological and spiritual development. He didn't want to do a biography of the facts of his life, but he did want to do a biography that explained his own individuation process and the major steps that he had in his life. So that's Memories, Dreams, Reflections. If you haven't read that book, I urge you to do so. There's also a wonderful audible.com version of Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which I've listened to in my car many times, and I enjoy it very much. But anyway, in this section, Dr. Shamdasani is talking about the descent into hell. And he says, Jung's underworld, his hell, was not an afterlife, but a condition within this life. And then he quotes Dr. Jung. Okay, quote, what do you think of the essence of hell? Hell is when the depths come to you with all that you no longer are or are not yet capable of. Hell is when you can no longer attain what you could attain. Hell is when you must think and feel and do everything that you know you do not want. Hell is when you know that your having to is also a wanting to, and that you yourself are responsible for it. Hell is when you know that everything serious that you have planned with yourself is also laughable, that everything fine is also brutal, that everything good is also bad, that everything high is also low, and that everything pleasant is also shameful. The reason I mention this, and some of you may know that I had an experience on my daughter's 22nd birthday. She had been living in Russia for a year and a half, and she came back. I hadn't seen her for a year and a half, and we had a lovely dinner at an Afghan restaurant in downtown Washington. And We had a long talk about our various experiences around the world. I had taken her and her sisters around the world, and they had lived in Japan for 5 years, and we had done many, many things together over the years. And this particular evening, which was her 22nd birthday, was just a lovely evening. But she had fallen in with fundamentalist missionaries in Kazan, Tatarstan. These were American fundamentalist missionaries. And uh, at the end of the evening, just out of the clear blue sky, she says to me, "Dad, I'm sorry to say this to you, but I think you're going to hell." Well, I dropped into hell at that moment, very much in the way of Dr. Jung's uh, discussion of it here, and it took 10 years to work my way out of it. And it that very night, it caused a psychogenic experience for me, which was a vision of Mephistopheles plopping down and sitting in my passenger seat of my car on the way back to my home. And there's a video that describes that evening in more detail called, anyway, if you use the term Mephistopheles, you'll find it on the YouTube channel. Um, but I wanted to, again, looking at this book, which is C.G. Jung, a biography of books. So here's a book that he had in his shelf, which was The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And it was a book done in printing plates by William Blake. And I wanted to read this to you because this particular page has interesting precursors to both Freudian psychology and Jungian psychology. Now, Mr. Blake lived most of his life in the 18th century. He was 65 in 1825 when he did the plates for the Book of Job, which I've separately discussed. And you can find those plates in the two videos entitled Edinger's Portable Analytic Hour, Parts 1 and 2. And you can hear Dr. Edinger's description of those plates and how they relate to psychology now. But I'm just going to read to you this one page of now William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. As a new heaven is begun, and it is now 33 years since its advent, the eternal hell revives, and lo, Swedenborg is the angel sitting at the tomb. His writings are the linen clothes folded up. Now is the dominion of Eden and the return of Adam into paradise. See Isaiah 34 and 35. Without contraries is no Without contraries is no progression. Attraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate are necessary to human existence. From these contraries spring the religious call, good and evil. Good is the passive that obeys reason. Evil is the active springing from energy. Good is heaven. Evil is hell. And so this is what I was reading just now. I don't know if you can see that, but anyway, for what it's worth. Just I just wanted to give you a sense of it. This was some just note pages that Dr. Shamdasani put into there, and shows Dr. Jung's crossouts and rewrites and pastes over. Right here, he's written a whole new section and pasted over it. Of course, he was writing before there were word processors handy. And so this is the caption on this is the manuscript of Jung's notes for his talk Faust and Alchemy. This page lists related alchemical motifs. And then on the facing page is the frontispiece of Jung's dream symbols of the individuation process with the epigram from Virgil, which is here. I just read this caption here. So anyway, it's a beautiful book, and as I say, it is not cheap. It was $65, I believe. And another thing in it is this, which is the draft of the Spiritus Mundi, and then the final version that appears in the Red Book. I'm going to skip reading what he said about that now, but I urge you, if you have a chance to sit down and just look through this book at Barnes & Noble, that would be terrific, or if you can find it in your library. If your library does not have it, I urge you to get it through interlibrary loan and take a look, because it's quite an interesting book. Now, I was going to, did I already read about truth? Or did I do that earlier? I think I might have done that earlier. Okay, if I'm rereading something that you already have heard, please let me know in chat. And your chats are only coming up very briefly, so if I don't notice it, it's only because it's passing so quickly. Yes, I will list the books I'm suggesting here in the description, but that'll be in the playback, and I probably won't get to that until tomorrow, until I can get my computer functional again. In this book, though, this is the first book that I'm talking about, C.G. Jung, Psychological Reflections. It has many different chapters. One of them is called self-realization. I think truth is relative, but it depends on where you are right now in your life. Okay, whoever's chat was immediately above Mary Louise's, I didn't see that chat, but anyway, I'll see it in the replay perhaps. So anyway, this is talking about truth, and I had determined that truth is from each of us individually, and so there is no such thing as an ultimate truth. There is only the truth as it has manifested through each one of us, and you'll hear some of that here. Because I happen, by synchronicity, I was thinking about truth, and I opened this book, and here are these quotes from Dr. Jung, so let me share these with you. First of all, nothing is so jealous as a truth. Okay, next one. I'm reading from page 209 of this book. Okay. The investigation of truth must begin afresh with each case, for each case is individual and not derivable from any preconceived formula. Each individual is a new experiment of life in her ever-changing moods and an attempt at a new solution or new adaptation. And so what he's saying is that each one of us is an experiment of Mother Nature. And so anyway, he goes on. These are all in separate locations, so this is one of the reasons why Dr. Jung's oeuvre is so difficult, because he has these great pithy statements, but they are um, located all over his oeuvre. Until you've familiarized yourself with much of what he's written, you can't find them. But anyway, and that's one of the reasons why these books are very valuable, because what they've done is pulled together these special statements and put them in one place so you can see in one close, close place the various things that he said and understand them. No doubt it is a great nuisance that mankind is not uniform but compounded of individuals whose psychic structure spreads them over a span of at least 10,000 years. Hence, there is absolutely no truth that does not spell salvation for one person and damnation to another. All universalisms get stuck in this terrible dilemma. And so I was talking earlier about the fact that um, we are all at different stages of psychic development. It's very easy to see this in some societies. For example, I've been to India 44 times since 1994, believe it or not. And when you go to India, what you see is the 21st century overlaid over the 12th century. And maybe that's overlaid over the 5th century or something like that. People are living in very different ways, and they're psychologically quite different as well in those different societies. Um, and and so you see that in India, you see it in some Muslim countries, especially in Saudi Arabia, where you see people that are their psychological development is easily 400 or 500 years behind Western Europe, because uh, you know we were doing those barbarous things to one another, like burning people at the stake for heresies. We were doing that 500 years ago, and but there are plenty of people in Saudi Arabia who still do that and do horrific things to people because they don't see the world in the same way. Now, this is going to change very rapidly, I presume, because now that the internet has opened up all these boundaries, oh my God, things are changing. Okay. Um, in our delusion ridden world, a truth is so precious that nobody wants to let it slip merely for the sake of a few so called exceptions which refuse to toe the line. And whoever doubts this truth is invariably looked on as a faithless reprobate, so that a note of fanaticism and intolerance everywhere creeps into the discussion. And yet each of us can carry the torch of knowledge but a part of the way until another takes it from him. If only we could understand all this impersonally, could understand that we are not the personal creators of our truths, but only their exponents, mere mouthpieces of the day's psychic needs, then much venom and bitterness might be spared, and we should be able to perceive the profound and superpersonal continuity of the human mind. Um, so I thought those were pretty good quotes. Um, I'll just skip over to two more that I thought were particularly good. These relate to moral law, but they're still in the, let's see. I'm sorry I didn't see the question about morality to overlap. Wait a minute, let me just see if I can catch the chats back. Okay, it's not, unfortunately, on my iPhone, your chats are passing too quickly, so I'm not necessarily catching them. I just lost the last two. I'm sorry about that. Um, but I will endeavor to address them in comments on the replay. Okay, so moral law is nothing other than an outward manifestation of man's innate urge to dominate and control himself. This impulse to domestication and civilization is lost in the dim, unfathomable depths of man's evolutionary history and can never be conceived as the consequence of laws imposed from without. Man himself, obeying his instincts, created his laws. And one more. This is from On the Psychology of the Unconscious, collected work 7. Morality was not brought down on tablets of stone from Sinai and imposed on the people, but is a function of the human soul, as old as humanity itself. Morality is not imposed from outside. We have it in ourselves from the start. Not the law, but our moral nature, without which the collective life of human society would be impossible. That is why morality is found at all levels of society. It is the instinctive regulator of action which also governs the collective life of the herd. But moral laws are only valid within a compact human group. Beyond that, they cease. There the old, there the old truth runs, homo homini lupus, which I think means man is a wolf unto himself or something like that. Um, with, the with the growth of civilization, we have succeeded in subjecting ever larger human groups to the rule of the same morality, without, however, having yet brought the moral code to prevail beyond the social frontiers, that is, in the free space between mutually independent societies. There, as of old, reign lawlessness and license and mad immorality, though of course it is only the enemy who dares to say it out loud. And so I think it's very interesting to see the different moral perspectives of Christianity and modern fundamentalist Islam clashing, and yet now that we've opened up the internet, um, ideas are going across very quickly. So as Dr. Jung was still living in a world where everything was separated, and so Switzerland was different from Italy, was different from Austria, and so on. And today we have a world that's just flowing together psychologically, and so changes that took Western humanity 500 years to make are now happening in just a few decades. And I just see that in my Indian colleagues, for example. When I was first going to India in the early 1990s, and you spoke to an Indian, they were speaking what Westerners would call English, which was an Indian form of English with kind of a British accent. And now, after the internet has opened up and ideas are passing back and forth very quickly, you see the Americanization of the English spoken by Indians, so that nowadays young Indians are speaking much more like Americans as opposed to like good Britishers. Um, so let me focus for a moment on any questions that might come up. Um, I, even though you've only been watching this video for 50 minutes, I've been talking for an hour and a half, and That's my problem, not yours, but I'm running out of steam. So if you have a question, even if you've put it on the chat earlier, if you'll put it up now in the next couple of minutes, I will do my best to focus on the questions that come up on my screen, which were disappearing pretty quickly as I was reading there. And then I will do my best to have this, my technology worked out by the time of our Thursday reading group session on Answer to Job. There will be about 4 more sessions on Answer to Job, and these are being conducted at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursdays, and you can find the replays of them in the Q&A playlist. And what I have put on there, effect, is a graduate level course in Answer to Job. So if you went back and looked at all those videos, I think you would learn a lot about what Dr. Jung was saying about Answer to Job, and I'm going to work through the final paragraphs in the next 4 weeks. I think will be complete, and then we'll talk about what to work on next. Have I read Erich Neumann's book, The History and Origins of Consciousness, I believe? Yes, I have read it, and I have it within arm's reach. Let's see. I guess I have it within arm's reach, but I can't see it from where I'm sitting clearly. Anyway, the history and origins of consciousness is a very, very powerful book, and I highly recommend it. And there's another book that I also recommend that's a bit easier reading. Let's see. Oh yeah, here. There it is. just took a moment. The Origins and History of Consciousness by Erich Neumann, and you can see it's not a thin volume. But there's another book called Psychic Energy by Esther Harding, and that also is an excellent book, and I highly recommend it and recommend reading them together. Although I think that Esther's book is a little easier going. Dr. Neumann got sort of bogged down in the Ouroboros, so about half of this book is about the Ouroboros, which is the image of the snake eating its tail. And I found there was a little bit too much about the Ouroboros in here, but he does have the Great Mother and many other things. So I highly recommend this book also. Now, there's an interesting story about this book, because even in this form, okay, my paperback copy is 444 pages long, but Dr. Neumann wrote this book during World War II when he was living in Tel Aviv, and he was cut off from the Jungians that were working in Zurich. And after the war, the Jungians in Zurich wanted to start the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich, and they wanted to start publishing things from others besides Dr. Jung. And he came in with this then 800-page manuscript, and the various disciples immediately around Jung, who were all women, and gently referred to as the Valkyries, Jolande, Jacobi, and Aniela, Jaffe, and so on. They didn't want to publish Neumann's book because they thought it would overwhelm all the other things that they had to publish, which were mainly only essays or collections of essays and so on. And so they declined to publish it, but Dr. Jung made sure that it got published anyway by his main publisher, but separately from the C.G. Jung Institute series. And so anyway, it's a great book, and you can learn a lot from it. As you see in my style of reading, I have read it very carefully. And who knows, we may even talk about it in this reading group at some time in the future. Obviously, this isn't the most convenient way to do it on a cell phone, but anyway. And let's see if I can put my hands on Harding's book. I'd love to read to you. Just a moment. I need to grab it. I need to see it. Let's see. I need a librarian, actually. Oh yeah, here it is. I definitely should be keeping these books together. Here's Harding's book, and it's called Psychic Energy, Its Source and Its Transformation. This book was out of print, and I bought it as a used book, which is why I've marked it up heavily. If I had bought it as a new book, I might not have done. Ah, there it is. Oh my God. I have been looking for this image forever because this is an alchemical image of what the alchemists thought society should be. And what you see here is an alchemical vase, and in this vase are 3 dragons, okay, which represent our instincts. And they are obviously controlled, and here's civilization all around this. And I have looked for this image left, right, and center because I always love it when I find it, and then I forget where it is, but now I know, so I'm going to put my handkerchief in there so that I can go back and pull that out again. That's a great summary image of alchemy itself. Okay, but okay, I'll just read to you one page, which is from the introduction of Dr. Harding's book, Psychic Energy, and this is chapter 1, Introduction. And there's at the beginning of it, there's a brief quote: "The forms that swim and the shapes that creep under the waters of sleep," quote unquote. And ellipsis. Okay, so here's what she says, and it's quite a profound statement. "Beneath the decent facade of consciousness, with its disciplined moral order and its good intentions, lurk the crude instinctive forces of life, like monsters of the deep, devouring, begetting, warring endlessly. They are for the most part unseen, yet on their urge and energy life itself depends. Without them, living beings would be as inert as stones. But were they left to function unchecked, life would lose its meaning, being reduced once more to mere birth and death, as in the teeming world of the primordial swamps. In creating civilization, man sought, however unconsciously, to curb these natural forces and to channel them, and to channel some part at least of their energy into forms that would serve a different purpose. For with the coming of consciousness, cultural and psychological values began to compete with the purely biological aims of unconscious functioning. Throughout history, 2 factors have been at work in the struggle to bring about the control and discipline of these non-personal instinctive forces of the psyche. Social controls and the demands of material necessity have exerted a powerful discipline from without, while an influence of perhaps even greater potency has been applied from within the individual himself in the form of symbols and experiences of a numinous character. Psychological experiences that have had a powerful influence on certain individuals in every community. So powerful indeed were these experiences that they became the core of religious dogmas and rituals that in turn have influenced the large mass of the people. That these religious forms have had power to curb the violence and ruthlessness of the primitive instincts to such an extent and for so long a time is a matter for the greatest wonder and amazement. It must mean that the symbols of a particular religion were peculiarly adapted to satisfy the urge of the conflicting inner forces, even lacking the aid of conscious understanding, and in many cases without the individual's having himself participated in the numinous experience on which the ritual was originally based. Anyway, I mean, that's the opening of that book, and I think it's quite a profound book and really worth your time. Um, so, uh, Here we are. It's been, I apologize, the technology and I arm wrestle almost weekly, but we seem to have been able to have a session that a few of you could participate in tonight. And I will do my best to both give you the names of the books that I've discussed in the replay discussion underneath the video tomorrow after I can get my computer back operational. And then we'll go on as usual with the Answer to Job session on Thursday at 1:30, and next week again the reading group regular session, which I hope to initiate at 8 p.m. as usual. And thank you all for joining. There have been a lot of people that have been watching these videos, and if you sort of scan through the videos that have been posted, you'll see that these longer videos have had quite a following and have been watched around the world. So I'm glad that you have been able to participate with me here, and I'm glad to have this backup source in the form of my iPhone. By the way, sometimes I don't quite trust the technology, and since YouTube doesn't really talk to us, they just do things, and then somehow people who follow YouTube's activities figure out what YouTube is doing. We never know what they're doing, and we never know when they will, cancel for whatever reason a channel or whatever. And so, if that should ever happen here, please tell everyone you know that we will also be on Facebook on the Jung for Layman page. And normally I do also do videos on Periscope. There are a number of these videos, especially the behind the scenes videos, that are on Periscope. And as time goes on and companies merge and policies change and so on, we never know where we may have to be for our groups. So for now, it's going to consistently stay on YouTube and then in these other areas as secondary. But if ever the YouTube channel should disappear for some reason, please do look in these other places. And you can always send me email at skip.conover@gmail.com. If you are not a member of our Dropbox, I urge you to write to me at that email address with a normal email address, and I can add you to our Dropbox. And there is a very large quantity of valuable resources in that Dropbox. So I urge you to take a look and see what you can find, anything you can find in there. If you have been given membership in the Dropbox, you can download onto your own computer if you wish. And some of them are very large. So, but anyway, I think many of you already know about that, but anyway, the way to get into the Dropbox is to write to skip.conover@gmail.com. If you ever have doubts about where the group has moved, you can also write to me there, and I will be happy to talk to you. And so thank you very much for joining this evening. I'm going to wrap it up 10 minutes early for me, but I've been talking for nearly 2 hours, and I've actually given the session twice, so I'm a little bit hoarse. So I'll see you next week, and hopefully we'll have the technology in better shape by then. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.